The early history of Vietnam spans thousands of years and witnessed the evolution of distinct Vietnamese civilization and identity. Archaeologists have found artifacts indicating communities of sedentary agriculturists inhabited northern Vietnam as early as 4000 BCE. These people spoke Austroasiatic languages and left behind Neolithic tools and ceramic fragments. Starting around 1000 BCE, migrations of people speaking Sino-Tibetan languages from southern China began entering northern Vietnam. They eventually displaced the earlier Austroasiatic communities. These included ancestors of modern ethnic groups like the Vietnamese or Kin people and related Muong. They practiced wet rice cultivation and established villages stratified into social classes. The earliest Vietnamese polity emerged around the 3rd century BCE, called Van Lang in the Red River Delta region. However, by 111 BCE Van Lang had been absorbed into the Chinese Han Empire, which imposed Han colonial rule over northern Vietnam. For over a millennium afterwards, Vietnam was governed as part of Imperial China under the Chinese dynasties. During Chinese rule, Vietnamese culture adopted Confucian social philosophies, administrative practices, and Chinese characters. Vietnamese identity maintained distinctive elements, but became highly Sinicized. Southern Vietnam at this time was fragmented among various autonomous Cham polities descended from Indianized kingdoms. In the 10th century, Vietnamese chiefs like the Cuc family emerged to lead rebellions against Chinese dominance. In 938 CE, Ngo Nguyen established independent rule of the first Vietnamese dynasty, called Dinh. His successors, the early Le dynasty, 980 to 1009 CE, consolidated a centralized national administration based on Chinese models, but tailored to Vietnamese conditions. The Lai dynasty, 1009 to 1225 CE, extended imperial Vietnamese control further southward after defeating Cham territories. This established the modern boundaries of Vietnam. Under emperors like Lai Ton Tong, Vietnam saw tremendous cultural and economic growth, adopting Buddhism and building grand pagodas, temples, and institutions. Its educated bureaucracy was trained in classical Confucian philosophy and Chinese literature. During the 15th century, northern Vietnam was once again conquered by Ming China. Guerrilla leader Le Loi led a rebellion from 1418 to 1428, expelling Chinese forces and reclaiming Vietnamese independence. He founded the strong later Le dynasty and commissioned Le Code, which shaped Vietnamese legal and social order for centuries. This period from the 10th to 15th centuries marked the golden age of ancient Vietnamese dynastic imperial rule and nation building. It witnessed the formation of modern Vietnamese national identity under the Lai Tran empires, distinct from both Chinese and Cham influences. Their rule established Vietnam as a major Southeast Asian power prior to the early modern arrival of European colonialism in the 16th century. This history shaped the Vietnamese people's deep traditions of resistance against foreign domination. The Nguyen dynasty was the last ruling family of Vietnam, reigning from 1802 to 1945. It presided over major transformations in Vietnamese society and foreign relations as European colonialism spread across Southeast Asia. The Nguyen rulers centralized authority while navigating rising French conquest, establishing Vietnam as a modern nation-state. The Nguyen emerged in the 17th century in southern Vietnam as prominent warlords who supported the Trinh lords against the competing later Le dynasty based in Hanoi. In the 18th century, Nguyen Phuc Coat seized control of central Vietnam with the support of a peasant army. His successors increasingly consolidated control through military campaigns against rival warlords in the south. By 1802, Nguyen An had subdued most competitors and proclaimed himself Emperor Gia Long, establishing Hue as his capital and formally beginning the Nguyen dynasty. Gia Long continued the authoritarian bureaucratic model developed under the Liu, but reduced aristocratic privileges, centralized administration, and strengthened the monarchy. He issued legal and agricultural reforms to exert greater state control over the populace. However, the French had also been active colonizing nearby Cambodia and Cochinchina in southern Vietnam. In 1862, the French used violations of emissions religious rights as pretext to invade southern Vietnam under Napoleon III's colonial expansion. They started crushing Vietnamese resistance, seizing Saigon and the Mekong Delta region. Under treaties, Vietnam was nominally independent, but France held de facto power. Subsequent Nguyen emperors like Minh Mang and Tu Duc attempted modernization programs to strengthen Vietnam against the French, adopting Western military organization and technology. But France increased its demands on Vietnam as its Indochinese empire grew through further conquests of Laos and Cambodia. In 1883, France formally colonized Vietnam as part of French Indochina under the Protectorate Treaty. The Nguyen court was forced to accept French residents and military to protect Vietnam. This marked the start of full French domination that politically castrated the Nguyen monarchy. Hue remained Vietnam's symbolic royal capital while France administered the colonial government through Saigon and Phnom Penh. Opposition to foreign rule intensified through religious millenarian movements and proto-nationalist organizations. In 1945, with France occupied in World War II, the Communist Viet Minh under Ho Chi Minh briefly established an independent Democratic Republic of Vietnam, ending the Nguyen dynasty. But French rule returned, igniting Vietnam's decades-long anti-colonial war, culminating in French defeat in 1954. Post-war Vietnam was divided, with a pro-Western Southern Republic replacing the Nguyens. While losing ultimate power, the Nguyen dynasty preserved Vietnamese identity and statehood through the early modern colonial period. It oversaw national consolidation and confrontation with European incursions that shaped Vietnam's emergence as a nation battling to regain its independence in the 20th century wars. The Nguyen era bridged tradition and modernity during Vietnam's transition into the colonial world order.